Hey, everybody. I'm here with John Hendrix, professor, author, illustrator. John, thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Glad to be back. Love talking art and talking about what it means to be a maker.
Yeah, we were standing at your booth at Hutchmoot, and I was looking at the Pit of Despair illustration, and you walked
Mm.
up, and I was just engrossed in it. And I said, we need to sit down and have a proper conversation about this. There's so much in that drawing that applies to the artistic process and just life in general.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, it's my cat would like to join the conversation.
Welcome to the Pit of Despair.
I'm in my own pit of cat despair. Yeah. Um. Yeah. The wonderful thing about this idea and the making of this chart actually came from my own teaching with students and how often in the process of seniors making their capstone or their thesis project and feeling the weight of I'm now going to make something important, right? I'm now going to make something that represents all of my learning or whatever, that they began immediately to come crashing down into this feeling of pressure and of performance and of anxiety. And I just noticed the phenomenon of this happening over and over. And so at the beginning of class, I would draw this on the whiteboard. I'd be like, you're right here. You're very excited about this, but you're about to experience something terrible. And that terribleness is absolutely universal. And it's not just artists. I mean, I initially began teaching this concept to artists because I understood that personally. But I now sell these on my website, and I hear from people all over the world who are scientists or people writing their dissertation, people in finance. So, what I'm saying is that the pit of despair is a universal human experience. So, come join me and all of your friends in the pit of despair.
Yes. Yeah, it's an important topic because the struggle is real. The struggle is so real, but the struggle is not sexy. And when I walk through a museum, put down a great book, enjoy a good meal, hear a great song, what you see is the final product.
Yeah.
You don't see the struggle, and it looks effortless because
Mhm.
it's completed. And you're encountering the completed work. You don't get to see the rough drafts, you don't get to see the layers of paint under the final layer of paint.
Right. Well, and we're convinced that the artist or the writer knew that it was a masterpiece as they were making it. Like it's actually an assumption that we don't quite notice, but like every book that you're reading, whether it's George R. R. Martin or Stephen King or whatever, that line when you are reading it, the author did not know when they were writing that if this was any good or not, or if it would become a novel, or certainly not it would become like in Tolkien or Lewis's case, the greatest fantasy novels of the 20th century, they were struggling with it in the process of making it just like you are. And so there is this temptation to look at artists and call them geniuses. And what that stands in for in our minds, I think, is like, well, that meant that they didn't have a struggle, or they just sort of had this kind of talent that covered over all of the normal processes of human art making.
Yeah, this person must be a genius.
Yeah, and I'm not. Like, clearly, I'm
And
struggling, so therefore, I'm not part of that class of people that make great things or whatever.
I've been working on creating creative renditions of the Psalms for about 4 years. So I've got
Mhm.
about 75 done. And I remember that spark of inspiration in the beginning 4 years ago. I thought, "Hey, this here's an idea.
Oh.
Let's just jump into it." So I
It
just
feels so
cannonballed
good,
into this
doesn't it?
project.
That
It
spark, it's just
does.
so intoxicating. Yeah.
It feels so good, and it was gonna be renditions of the Psalms, original poetry, and theological commentaries. 5 minutes later, had a Substack, and I was off to the races. And
Yeah.
I did that for about 2 years, and I realized as people started reading it, I have some people who like the poem and don't like the other 2 things, some people who like the theology and don't like the other 2 things, and some people who just wanna read a different version of the Psalms, and I thought, what is this idea?" And so 2 years into it, I just started over at Psalm 1 and
Oh,
combined the psalm and the poem into one and made the Psalms more poetic. And it took 2 years to figure out what I wanted it to be. So I was just starting and going and feeling a little confused, feeling some tension, but I didn't stop. And now it's getting to the point of, I know what this is. I like this. But now I'm just in a season of rereading them and realizing that I have the form right, but I've made something that I don't even truly understand. So I'm now finding out what I've written for the first time, basically, even though I wrote it.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I mean, that's the whole weird thing about we really don't know what we're making while we are making it. And in fact, the whole experience of art is like a kind of discovery where you get surprised by the work that you make. And of course, you know that to be true when you think about it later, but you never like read, for instance, Lord of the Rings and imagine that when he began, Tolkien did not know what the Ring of Power was. He did not know, like, when the Nazgul show up to chase the Fellowship, he had no idea who they were. Like, truly, they came unbidden into the story. Now, this shocks people as to be like, how could such a classic work not have been designed at the beginning and just implemented by a great master? Aslan was not part of the story. He came bounding into the story of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and sort of surprised Lewis. And you hear this from creative people all the time, that when you submit yourself to the work of art as kind of its own, its own being in a way, it begins to talk to you. And I think there's anxiety and fear that comes with making, but also healthy artists learn to surrender and just let the work tell you what it's supposed to be. And that also can actually be very scary because it's like you're out of control of your own work.
It's almost like the thing you're making has a life of its own, and you're stewarding that life, even though you're the creator, but you're not
Hmm.
omnipotent over the creation.
Yeah, I've heard Andrew Peterson talk about in the Wingfeather books that and this is a common thing with people that write fiction, is the characters begin to have minds and wills and desires of their own. And that that is kind of spooky. It's also kind of beautiful when we think about the ability of God to create sort of ex nihilo from nothing is this thing that only God can do, right? And yet it, the only place humanity can do that is in our imagination. So as we are sort of sub-creating these other worlds, these other stories like God, it's like this little hidden trick where the characters themselves begin to come alive in this little form, just like when God made the universe. Like, that's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. There was this latent potential in God's good creation for
Yeah.
things that he didn't build.
Yeah.
He made makers, and then we made other things.
Uh-huh. And the things we make somehow operate under that same rubric. It's yeah. It's almost like someone designed the whole thing.
It's amazing. I've always been fascinated by the narrative arc of scripture. Starts in a garden,
Hmm.
and then the fall happens, and in Genesis 4, everybody's making things, and the
Mhm.
first cities happen, and it gets pretty wild. It's like everyone's a warlord all of a sudden, and there's lots of oppression and injustice. But it goes garden to city, and then given that step, you would think, oh, at the end of all this, when God fixes everything, we're going to be back in a garden. But
Mhm.
actually, it's a garden city. The
Yeah.
grand picture we're given at the end of Revelation of God's new creation is both a garden and a city. So you have God's creation and something that humanity made and that he redeemed. He didn't
Yeah.
just like shake the etch a sketch and start back over, but he
Yeah.
incorporated it all.
Yeah, and we get to participate in it with him. It's not the old polish the rails on a sinking ship. That's a very broken way to think about our world, or the sort of, well, it's all going to be incinerated. That is clearly not what scripture tells us about God's interest in humanity and the things that we make. But there's also this weird tension where, have you ever noticed that good art, good writing, good music does not want to exist? Like think about that. You have to like really fight for good work to be made. You just can't simply drop a guitar down a flight of stairs and get Hotel California, right? Why is that? Like, was it before the fall? Could Adam paint an amazing landscape, like a Bierstadt level landscape? I don't know if it's sin. This is a whole nother conversation that I think I'm out of my depth to explore. But the truth is, in the here and now, There is no other way to get good art than to really fight for it. And I don't think people really think that about good art. I think they imagine, again, some people have talent, some people have great ideas, and I don't have any of those things. And again, if we could jump into this chart, I think it's actually important to look at. And now, again, this is a hat tip to William Goldman from The Princess Bride. I began this many years ago when I thought this was common knowledge about the pit of despair. If you've not read Princess Bride, go do that immediately. Stop this interview. But now young people don't know what I'm talking about when I say the pit of despair. But what is critical, and this is the universal experience I've had in my making career, is that I have an idea, just like you said with your Psalms project, and it's like gorgeous, it's perfect, it's poetic, it like enlivens you, right? And this is the thing that all ideas get from us, is just this sense of excitement. And in this chart, I've imagined that as this like perfect butterfly, right? And you climb the ladder, and as soon as you try to catch this beautiful butterfly from your mind, you immediately fall headlong into the pit of despair. And it's just this like dawning reality of like, to make this idea real, there are not just like two or three things that are challenges I have to push through, but there's like 100. And the sense is this is not working. And it's not just that, it's that the data you're getting back from your idea, like you're trying to make your idea real, and the idea seems to be telling you this is bad, like this is not working. And where students struggle, and this is why I did this chart, is that when they're in the pit, they believe that the idea is flawed. And so the temptation is to go back to the beginning and find a new idea that won't have that struggle in it, because clearly the idea was wrong. I have to change it because it was too hard, and shouldn't this be fun? And boy, that is a recipe for frustration and ultimately just sort of giving up, because you just are convincing yourself that other people have ideas that work. My ideas just don't.
And they're starting to get feedback that is less than what they envisioned, both externally, it's crickets, or people are saying this just isn't there.
Right. Or like
Internally,
your friends are like, I don't get this. This is not working. Right.
yeah. I'm thinking of Jared Manley Hopkins, who was
Oh,
famously unsuccessful, but wrote some of the
famous.
most beautiful poetry.
Yeah.
All his friends were just like, "Please don't make me read any of this ever again."
Yeah. That's right.
You're starting to get internal feedback that, okay, this doesn't feel fun anymore,
Hmm.
and you just want to quit.
And you did the very hard thing, which is to allow yourself to like reimagine what that idea is, or to like start over with that idea. This is the old, killing your darlings thing. It is very difficult to do where you've invested time and energy, and for some reason human beings really worry about wasting time. And so you've invested in this project, and you're sort of, you're sort of pot committed, to use poker language. You feel like, I can't start over. I've already got all of this time invested. But the only way to get out of the pit is slowly climbing through this like iteration, reinvestment, sticking with it, the persistence to try multiple approaches, to allow other people to read things and to see what feedback you get, to listen to critics. And, there's just no other secret formula than it takes a lot of time. And I always tell people this, because they look at like my book Myth Makers, and they're like, wow, you must have just had this awesome idea and then you sat down and did it. And it was just a mess from the beginning to the end, just a total mess. I had this, like you, I had this idea of being able to tell a mythological story about the sub-created world of Lewis and Tolkien's friendship. In many ways, I think their friendship is as big of a myth as Narnia and Middle-earth, right? And I was like, I was taken with this notion of like a myth, not myth like a lie, but like a myth that points to a bigger story about their friendship. But of course, like instantly, it was difficult. Number one, the Inklings don't do anything. They sit down and talk over pints. You cannot have 300 straight pages of that. And so immediately I was like, I felt there was a core that was there. But boy, as the struggle of how do you deploy this narrative to make a 12-year-old mind interested in it was really, really challenging. And it took 5 years of hanging with that to believe that it could be something that would work.
Yeah, you did not bite off a small project.
Yes.
But again, as the
I
reader,
blame the rabbit room 100%. So, yes, you can you can take the blame for me feeling like this was even possible to begin with, but yeah.
that's great. So it's easy to get into the pit of despair. Really, all you have to do is start. You just have to have an idea and start bringing it into the world.
Guaranteed. Yeah.
What do you do in the pit of despair and how do you get out? And what kind of mentalities or practices are useful? You've mentioned some of them, but let's just continue our walk through this drawing.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I always stress when I'm teaching is that our work always gets better in community, right? It feels like artists should protect their ideas, should be scared of other people stealing their work, and so they tend to not want community. But the real secret sauce in any education is the cohort, is your peers, your faculty, mentors. And so the way out of the pit is letting others help you because we really don't see our work as clearly as we think we do. In fact, it takes many decades, actually, I think, to know what you are making and how it actually is received by other people without that interchange with others. When we have people around that we trust, and that could be a small group, a crick group, that could be one friend that really knows you and knows your work. Boy, that's really helpful to help you see what it is you're making and see how different that is than what you thought you were making.
Yeah. And it can be so helpful when you hit the pit and you just think, I quit.
Yeah,
Even to have one person say, keep at this. You
yeah.
have something here.
Yeah, and that was I mean, for a great example in the Inklings for Tolkien and Lewis. Lewis never really influenced Tolkien as you might expect, but what he did was just, like, love his stuff and be like, "This is awesome. I can't wait to read the next chapter." There were a couple letters where clearly he helped Tolkien through some kind of block. We don't know exactly what it was, but it wasn't like giving him copy edits. It was really like being a fan of his work. And it's a really beautiful example because of just how simple it is. You don't have to solve their creative problems. You just have to be next to them and be like, this is kind of great. Keep going.
Yeah. Because it hurts. It hurts to be in the pit. I'm gonna throw a John Hendrix quote at you. You ready? Here
Uh,
we go.
Yeah, quoting. Yeah, perfect.
You said, if you want a good piece of art, go into it knowing the cost is coming. It will be costly to you if you want it to be valuable.
You know what? That I agree with that quote from myself. And it actually applies to everything in your life. Like anything that is valuable, your family, your friendships, your front yard, if you care about like, planting flowers, you have to count the cost. It will require something of you. So you just can't simply sit down to a piece of art and not think, this is going to be costly. And I think if we start art that way, it's better than discovering it halfway through, you know? And again, this is the thing that you only learn after making a lot of art in your life.
So you fall into the pit, chasing this butterfly of an idea. You pick yourself up. You've got some allies. You've got your Sam next to your Frodo. You get on your backpack and you look up at the mountain. You think, I'm ready. Let's do this. What is the upward climb like? What should we expect on the way? What illusions should we dispense with? Walk us through it.
I think this is like if you've ever done any kind of construction project and they say, this new addition will take 6 months, you've got to like triple it. And I think it's that way with art too. You've just got to expect that it's going to take a lot longer than you imagined. And many artists get really caught up in like, I'm not fast enough. I'm not producing quickly enough. And I don't see how that's a value that we should really prioritize. I get like, okay, maybe we need to make some money and pay the bills, but most things of value, take a long time as well as being costly. So as you're climbing out, of course, you're going to hit these very small micro despair pits. Don't be scared by that. It's just part of the exit strategy. One of the things I always remind people when you get to the end, I rarely enjoy the work until I reach this kind of magic threshold. I kind of cross over this imaginary boundary where it stops being bad and it starts being just like okay. And then I sort of know what the work is and I begin to feel confident in making more of it. That's when I really start to enjoy the process. But the critical thing is that whatever you make, that end result which is never going to look like it did in your head, that you're going to end up with this weird abstract expressionist version of the butterfly, that no one else saw the imaginary butterfly. Only you saw that. So the thing that you make, it's never going to be as good as the thing you imagined. And I still carry around in my mind what I thought my books would be like. And Faithful Spy, I thought was going to be a very different book. I thought it was going to be like a sketchbook, like where every page felt like Dietrich's journal that was drawn in, and it ended up not being that. I couldn't get to that place, and I still look at it with disappointment, right? And this is why artists hate their work, because they see what, we see what we saw in our mind. Other people see what was made, and they're like, that's awesome. And you're like, oh, yeah, well, it sucks because you have no idea how awesome it was before I started working on it, right? But this is the problem that all artists deal with. The thing we made is different than the thing we intended to make.
John, this all sounds so hard and heartbreaking, and there's just vulnerability from
Yeah.
start to finish. Like
Yeah.
you won't even end up with what you set out to create, and the whole process will be hard for a long time before it's fun.
hmm I'm
That
like a
is
reverse
that's real.
motivational speaker here. I don't know, like I before you begin, realize it will be painful, hard, and sad. Yeah.
But I think that's what is so appealing about the ideas you've baked into this drawing. You wrote at the bottom in big letters, normalize struggle.
hmm
And I think that is a much more resilient mindset for
hmm
people. If it's going to be hard, at least it can be loving to crush people's illusions that it won't be.
Well, okay, and here's the paradox here, and I realize that this doesn't make sense, but I think like most paradoxes, there's a kind of poetry to it. You are simultaneously trying to, like, imagine two graphs both going in opposite directions. You're trying to normalize struggle on one part of like sitting down and making work. On the other side, you're trying to prioritize enjoyment of the process, right? And so if you can do those things together, it's actually, I think, a healthier way to embody just what it means to be a fallen human being in the
Mm.
world. I'm going to sit in front of this typewriter, in front of this canvas, and I'm going to know that it's not going to be perfect, but I am going to enjoy doing it. Right. And if you can do that, again, like Annie Dillard says, the way we spend our days is the way we spend our lives. And if you can make that, I'm going to sit and enjoy making, I'm going to image God in this moment. I am going to be present with the work, and I'm going to de escalate all of the expectations I have for this to succeed, then you're left with, I think, a very good like mental framework for just being a maker. And that sounds very paradoxical, but I have found that it is helpful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the missing piece. It's not just this is going to be painful and long and struggle is normal, but you'll get something at the end of it. It's if you have something inside you, if you have the work inside you and the craft inside you, and it sings when you do it, even through the struggle,
Yeah.
that's the missing piece for the resilience. That I can sit down and chop this onion or lay down this line of
Mhm.
text on my word processor, and I like it. It's satisfying in some way, even in the struggle.
Well, and if I can use some of, I think you were quoting R.F. Cap there about chopping an onion. And if I can use some of his wisdom from Supper of the Lamb, it's that God didn't make the world for a utility. Like it's not a means to an end. It exists in and of itself because it is good, and it is all entirely unnecessary, right? If you sit down and say every facet of this world is lavish and unnecessary to God, then you can just see how astonishing it all really is, right? And so when we sit down to make art, you can embrace that same kind of like reckless energy when you're making something. And this doesn't need to exist. It doesn't need to fulfill any expectations. It's not a utility. I'm not just trying to get a result. I'm not just trying to make something in order to make a profit. I mean, early on in my career, I was in the very inverse of this. I was making paintings that were very technically good because I was always the best painter in my class. And so I thought that meant I had to paint things. But I hated painting. I sat down to my desk like I was going into the coal mines. It was like, well, okay, 8 hours of, mixing paint and applying highlights, and I had no joy in it, right? It was all a means to an end. And so I was not afraid of the hard work. I was very aware of the disappointment. But man, I had no real love of sitting down and doing the craft. And when you don't have a love of the craft, there's no way you're going to choose that over watching Game of Thrones or whatever other thing you might have in front of you. So that centering of enjoyment is really not about chasing your bliss or whatever. Like, that's not what it's about. It's about finding that core activity that just motivates you, that makes you want to make more. And whatever that might be, you gotta kind of chase that.
Yeah, and maybe that is a telos that can take us through the struggle. So
Yeah.
when you enjoy the thing, the struggle, like you're using the way God made you to explore his good creation, to enrich and enliven and bring things into being that didn't exist. And there's some joy in that if you're doing the right thing, the thing that gives you joy. And then the struggle will always be a struggle because it's normal. But it's also a dance. And you get to discover something in the process and build those discoveries into the thing that you make so that when people see it, read it, taste it, experience it at the end, they also get to experience some part of that discovery,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah. Oh
it's
man,
special.
that's a total bingo there. I mean, it's weird to say it, but when you love the activity, people can feel that. And I have met students that are like, "What is popular in the market now? What edge can I find to make my work successful?" And I just feel like that stuff eventually leads people to feeling very bitter because if it doesn't work, they feel like they're left with nothing. They chased a market, it didn't work. They have neither monetary success nor work that they like or enjoyed making, right? So when you center that, like, I'm going to feel like no matter what, I'm going to love making this drawing. I'm going to be present with it and I'm going to share it with others. And that is a really good benefit to be left with if that's all the art making is.
I love it. John, you're a teacher, so you've given us many things. Pretend we are your students walking out of the classroom. You want to say one last word. What would you offer us?
Oh man, I think, I mean, really, the thing I try to model with students is that there is not some sort of magical process. It feels like there is some recipe out there. It feels like there is a class of people that have it all figured out. And most people are really just making it up as they go. And I like to present a sort of like all teachers, really, we're not delivering data. Like, we're not just transmitting knowledge to people. You're just being this credible version of what it might look like to be that thing in the world, right? And I really want people to realize just how normal the struggle is, how normal feeling disillusioned is, how making ideas, like, I have so many ideas. The problem is not I don't have a good idea. The problem is I have too many good ideas, right? And so how do you then discern which idea you should put 5 or 6 years into? I mean, these are the questions that I struggle with. And I want people to know that whether you're a published author or whether you are picking up your first sketchbook, you both are going to fundamentally encounter the same problem, which is that good art does not want to exist, and you have to really fight for it if you want it to be in the world.
If only we could drop the guitar down the stairs and it just starts playing Hotel California.
Yeah. Yeah, or, Is He Worthy, right? Like, that's probably a better I
Or is
should
he
use
worthy?
that
Yeah,
for future.
that's right. But the craft is in the struggle and the output is in the struggle.
It is. I hate to say it. It's such a it's not what you lead with when you start with, "Hey, would you like to come to art school?" But, boy, it's such a universal experience.
Well, thank you so much, John. This has been rich. I want to rewind and play it all back.
Thanks, man.
Take care, buddy.